Welcome, everyone, to this edition of Online for Authors. Today, my guest is Renee Blodgett, who co-authored Magdalene's Journey with Anthony Companion. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me here, Carol. I'm excited to be on the show.
And we're excited to have you. Listen, although this work is a work of historical fiction, which you also call visionary literature, it was inspired, I understand, by some parallel experiences in your life. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah. Well, I would say that, about 10, 12 years ago, my partner, Anthony, started having these spiritual Kundalini awakening experiences. And during that chapter, if you like, he started channeling. So I don't know if the audience really knows what channeling is, but he started channeling and it turned our life upside down, and it came through in the fourth of messages, and not initially the book, actually. It was many other esoteric wisdom that really crossed between the East and the West. And the messages that came through about her life came a little bit later. So it was a journey. It was definitely a journey.
It really was very interesting as I read through the book. I think before we learn about Magdalene's journey, I need to have you explain how the story was told. I think you started there, to Angelo and Rochelle, who are the two main characters in your book.
You mean what was the impetus behind creating the fictional characters?
Yes.
Well, I think part of it was, as everything kind of rolled out, as someone who ran away from religion at a very early age, the dogma, all of it, I was a little terrified when these energies and these messages came through, because part of both of us, I think, was this association to traditional dogma or traditional religion, which is really not what I felt would reach the most number of people. And so in that experience of trying to figure out what was going on, I was asking a lot of questions. How is this real? How is this scientifically possible? So a lot of pushback, a lot of naysayer language in the beginning, right? A little bit of how could this be real? So a little bit about what the two characters were going through was our journey. We were back and second guessing this and trying to figure out what are the grounded applications of this, albeit interesting. Harry Potter was probably channeled. A lot of these books were probably channeled. So, how do we make it practical, right? And I think initially, it wasn't going to be about two characters at all. It was literally just going to be about her life. And the dialogue that actually started happening between us became a story in itself.
It did. It was a second story.
It was a second
story. Actually wrote two books. I agree. The portrayal of Mary Magdalene as a sinner and a prostitute is pretty well known. But she was actually from a well-off family. She had a different upbringing than Jesus, or Yeshua, who she refers to as. And she came from some money. So there were times when her family provided for her journey as well as her teaching. Do you think Mary's brother Lazarus would have been brought back from the dead if he wasn't her brother?
Oh, interesting question. Well, as I understand it, they were friends. Lazarus and Yeshua were friends early on before he embarked on his spiritual journey to India and other parts of the East to learn from sages and mages and so forth. So there was that initial kindling of a friendship before he left for India, and that's explained in the book as well. So I do think so, actually, because I think for Yeshua, though, what was interesting to me is there was a part of us in our human form, and I think even to this day, whether you're religious or not religious, we've heard about miracle raising, and all of a sudden stage 4 cancer gets reversed, and these miraculous healings, you do hear about them. in religious circles and outside of religious circles. So I think, he wasn't the only ancient sage or spiritual master who had that gift, but certainly he was the most profound one.
Yes,
and the one that had the most impact in the West, and really in all the three Abrahamic religions. So I think that component of how is this scientifically possible? Could this be? And having Lazarus and Yeshua both trying to get Rochelle and Angelo, the two main characters, away from that, because they said, yes, it's profound, but you have the abilities to do this too. What I find most profound, Yeshua would say, is when people realize their spirit selves and realize that they are connected to everything.
Yes.
And he would say that's the real miracle.
That was profound, yes. When Mary is referred to here as Miriam, that's how she refers to herself. What was her relationship like with the apostles, both male and female, as she tells Rochelle and Angela?
Well, as a woman 2,000 years ago.
I know, but I wasn't aware of how instrumental she was in those 7 other female apostles. And, I've seen films of her with the apostles as we know them. There's very little mention of the women as being apostles. And so this book kind of brought out more of that support for the women than I've ever read.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, and certainly for me, I've lived all over the world. I lived in London. I remember being in an international relations women's course in London. I think it was my sophomore year, and I was the only American in the room. And so It was a very diverse group of women, from all over the world. It was amazing, actually. And so I thought I knew about the patriarchy, between my college studies, traveling all over the world, living in various parts of the world, and knowing women's accounts of what happened, whether it's in a more tightly controlled Middle East or, what we've seen in Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, the list goes on. I mean, we still have a long way to go, right? And so I went down this rabbit hole when there was a point where Miriam had said, we were sold off like cattle to further the tribe, to expand the tribe, but it wasn't always that way. And the book actually got delayed for almost a year because I went down this patriarch rabbit hole and started doing some research and realized how little I knew. Yeah.
Well, it's full of information. I can't say that enough. When Miriam tells the story about their team teaching, and how she and Yeshua continued together to work after his death and resurrection. But what was her account beforehand when she saw him up on the cross? You do mention that in your book of what that was like, but more on the human side.
Well, I think it was heart-wrenching. There's a point where Rochelle's asking her, how did you feel? And I don't remember the exact words, but it was something along the lines of, how would you think that I would feel, as any woman who lost her husband, lost her lover, lost her best friend. It was heart-wrenching for all of them. And I think, back to your point, because I'm not really sure I addressed your question about her relationship with the apostles, it was stressed. And, I think part of it was those teachings that women were equal, when not just the male apostles, but no one in ancient Judaic society could see equality with women because they didn't see it around them. So even though it was a core part of Yeshua's teachings, it was very hard for them to process that when it wasn't their reality. And so I think because of that, there was a lot of jealousy. There was a lot of, confusion, why she's so close to the Savior, why she's so close to our Rabboni, our teacher. And so there was a lot of pushback, right? And she was also a very dynamic and strong woman who wanted answers. And she was smart. Yeah, she was smart.
She was very smart. Explain how she recognized him when he would come into the caves to share the teachings with her. That was interesting to me, how she knew he was there, because he wasn't,
After he died?
Yes.
So you're talking about when Yeshua's apparition, if you like, or imprint, or
exactly
Merkaba body or Merkaba body would appear to them. So the way that she describes it, and she first describes this in more detail when they're on the boat journey, leaving Judea and going to the south of France, and that there was another sister who, in air quotes, channeled him and brought that energy through. So she would describe it as, when the woman would heat up, her face would illuminate, and these messages would come through her. And so I think it was a combination of energy, the feeling of energy and knowing his presence. And in some cases, or at least that's what it shares in the book, is that his imprint or his Merkaba body, his energy body, would appear. And I think that's hard to fathom for any of us. I mean, even for someone who lives with a channel, it's still hard to fathom that if you haven't experienced it directly. And so, right? It's hard to imagine.
It was hard. Yeah, it was hard to, I spent a lot of time trying to feel good about that. It's hard to understand. You're right. And so he did help her while they were when she was with the other female apostles and they were on the boat going north, he still made sure that they were safe, and he would contact the ship people to make sure that someone watched out for them. I found that so endearing. I never thought about how he was taking care of his family, and I mean, before their child was born, even when she was pregnant and traveling with the other female apostles, there were a lot of things that they had to do. Like there were many times when they stopped and they had to find food, and they had to find clothing, and they had to find shelter. And yet I think she knew that he was always going to find it for her, that he would always make it happen.
Well, I don't know if he made it happen. I would say, and I don't want to get too deep into quantum physics here.
Right.
Because I am by far not a quantum physics expert, nor am I a scientist. So let's throw that out there right away. And that's one of the reasons visionary literature and historical fiction. But if you look at the quantum perspective, right, and those who are old enough to know Esther and Jerry Hicks, right, when they talk about the vortex and everything's possible in this vortex, the Manifestation 101 teachings, it's a little bit like that. I think it wasn't that he came in and did everything or for them, but I think it was a collaborative effort energetically. So if you believe, and of course Yeshua says this many times throughout the book, that the reason more so-called miracles happened back then was because people believed. They had faith. They had faith in, whether it was faith in him or faith in God.
Right.
God the Father is the language that they would use back then. They had faith. And, he constantly refers to that, right, as a way of making these so-called miracles happen. So I think it was a combination. I really feel that it was their perseverance of saying, we believe in the teachings, the so-called good news, as it was called back then, and we have the chutzpah and the courage to go out there following his crucifixion and continue to spread his good news.
Yeah. I wanted to also mention that Lazarus and Yeshua also appeared through Angelo and Rochelle. What did they offer in this book? What was the purpose of having them come through?
Well, we certainly didn't plan for it. Right? But let's start with Yeshua. I think one of the messages that we've already spoken about is that the male and the female are equal under the face of God, right? I'll say
Right.
Gode, right? The feminine face of God. And so that was a big part of his teachings. And so when he would come through to teach or add additional flavors, if you like, and textures to her narrative, I think it was a way to validate her message. And I think it was also a way to honor her, honor the divine feminine. And then, lastly, there's some healing, I think, that's taking place. If you think about how it was always the woman belonged to the man, right? She was his property. So they used to say back then, Miriam of Yeshua or Mary of Joseph, right? That was kind of a familiar way that they would refer. So, him coming through and also saying, I'm Yeshua of Miriam, was a way to turn the patriarch on its head, in an endearing and subtle way to say we're equal. And so I thought that was a really important, beautiful piece. And the other thing that I thought was powerful, there was a point in the book where and I don't know if you picked up on it, you have to be really paying attention, but sometimes there's a switch between either Miriam or Yeshua saying I or we. And I don't know if you noticed that. And when I went through, did you notice that? The editor in me wanted to edit that.
Really?
And, I wanted to edit it because I thought, well, we're moving back and forth between I and we. And of course, that's the point. That's the ancient
Exactly.
So the human part of me wanted to edit it for consistency, but the spiritual part of me, was hands off and surrendered into the teachings that we are not singular in nature. We are one with each other. And that was really the whole point. So I think that was a secondary piece of both Yeshua and Lazarus coming through. And then the third and final piece I'll mention is the Lazarus component. I think was important because it added different dimension to the whole thing. His personality was different. He became more educated, there was this charisma about him, and Rochelle even kind of says at one point, I wish that we had the opportunity to have dinner with him, because he had so much charisma in life. I mean, he was a lawyer, he was a lawyer.
He was very smart, very smart.
Very smart, and and also went through the disbelief that the two characters of the book went through, right? That he wasn't really on board with the teachings early on, and then of course after going through this transformation with Yeshua, everything got turned around for him, and he wanted to help more than ever support their teachings and their cause.
Right, that's true. I mean, the Catholic Church has canonized her as a saint. And so, that there was a part of my life where I was Catholic. And so it was amazing to us that, this role that we had of her in our head, of this prostitute, and then now she's a saint. But in this book, I see her as so much more human and so smart and so different than anything I had read before. I know that you were concerned about the roles of women in the historical time and how they were given the same importance as men, and we've talked about this a couple of times. So you did try to rebalance that masculine and feminine energy, and you had given us an example before. Is there anything else that you can point to where that in telling the story that was made clear?
Well, I certainly think the weaving in with Yeshua at times you would least expect it as an additional teaching moment. There were moments where Magdalene would talk about what it was like to be a woman 2,000 years ago. And then he would come into the story to add different texture to it. So I think that was beautifully done. It wasn't always when we expected it to come through. And in the editing process, I really realized I just needed to surrender into what was coming through us. Because things come through you, whether you call it channeling or you call it, and in the preface, as you know, I talk about some of the most visionary authors and film producers of our time. Would they have called it channeling? I don't know, right? But that's exactly what's happening. They're surrendering into something bigger, larger than themselves, and letting go and allowing that story to come through.
Right. I kind of called it channeling myself. One of the things that also held my attention for a while was just the whole fact of how she handled her pregnancy, how she was very open about talking about women and how they had to deal with being women during that period and how things were not that easy for them. And then the birth of Sarah and how the women, did that water birth of her. I was just fascinated by that back then, thinking about it. And so there was that real human side of that story that took me out of the channeling session and into the reality of, wow, she was a woman just like the rest of us. Yeah. And had this child and, went on to see her grow up and get married and move to Britain. And, well, we're not going to give away the whole story because we want people to buy this book and read about it. And so for those of you in the audience who are with us now, I want to tell you that for more information about this story, you can go log on to the Facebook page of Novels and Latte, and you can learn more about Magdalene's journey, and you might even win a copy of the book for yourself. I'm not going to give away any more, but I think we've teased it a lot. I know that, Renee, you have published 5 books of your own photographs, and you've done so many things in your career, served as spokesman for several clients on several broadcast television stations and so forth. And I've also seen where they've called you a master of storytelling, and that you do produce a broadcast and video services. What is your broadcast about?
Oh, our podcast. Well, our podcast bridges science and spirituality. So it's called Blue Soul Chats. And you can find it under Blue Soul Earth on YouTube. So it's just youtube.com/Blue Soul Earth. And then just go to the Blue Soul Chats playlist. And, one of the reasons I got excited about doing that, I've been a TEDx curator for a long time. And, I just love working with people who are really stepping up into their light and speaking their truth, defying the odds, very much like Mary Magdalene, right? And so, I started identifying people who were bridging that gap between science and spirituality as a way to also add credibility to some of the work that, that we were doing. And so that's how it started. And it's kind of morphed into different things at this point, because we've gone in a lot of different directions across topics, from healthcare and wellness to quantum physics to channeling itself. But, most of it's really how we're using our voices and our innate gifts to help accelerate consciousness.
Yes. And I don't want to, ignore the fact that Anthony was your partner on this, and he was your co-author. And I think he is a speech and language pathologist and a therapist who I understand worked with underserved popularities in schools in New York and California. Together, you founded Blue Soul Earth. What is Blue Soul Earth?
Well, Blue Soul Earth is our company that we founded to hold circles. We called them Blue Soul Circles. That was our early days. And it was really a gathering of where he would go into trance, and we would have some teachings that were primarily Gnostic in nature, which is very similar to, from the book, right? The initial Gnostic teachings. And so that was initially what came through. But a lot of the teachings really crossed so many different gaps. I mean, we were going into the Vedas and the Upanishads and the Kabbalah and obviously Gnosticism, but also paganism. And so bringing in all of these different disciplines is a way to teach universal truth. So that's really what we do at Blue Soul Earth. And we do that through online memberships where we meet in a sacred container like this and talk about those teachings and do guided meditations to kind of get us into what we call a theta brainwave state, to kind of silence the mind and realize that all of us have these unique abilities to channel. Everybody does. And to ignite that ability in you. And we do retreats. We're actually leading a retreat to the south of France this September with Mary Magdalene, right? And really retracing her steps. So we're pretty excited about that.
Now, that sounds exciting. Yes, I was going to ask you about the retreats and the workshops that you do, but that really is interesting. That's going to happen when?
September 16th through the 24th in Provence. So We'll be retracing her steps, but also doing some deep spiritual work as well. We have one spot left, so it was actually sold out, and now we finagled one more spot. But yeah, we're going to be retracing her steps, but also doing rituals and ceremonies that they likely performed over 2,000 years ago.
Very interesting. Yeah. Now, if any of our audience members wanted to get more information or contact with you, do you have a website that they could go to?
Yes. So it's bluesoulearth.com. And our memberships are studywithspirit.com. There's 2 memberships there. There's also some guided meditations. And then, of course, magdalenesjourney.com for the book. And we have a lot. We have a lot of different websites. We have a jewelry line for her, the magdalenecollection.com that got started last year. I don't know what came over me, but suddenly I was making jewelry. We have a lot of different things that we're doing. And the retreats we usually do one a year. We'd love to start moving this to twice a year as things kind of move on, maybe one abroad and one in the US. But this is our first international retreat. We've done, I think 6.
That's amazing.
Or so in the States.
So with all of this going on, are you considering, or do you have something in the works in another book?
Oh, absolutely. It's interesting because I always knew I would write books. I never thought I would be writing books about Mary Magdalene or anything even remotely close to it. But apparently this is part of a trilogy, she tells us. And so this will be part of a trilogy, but the second book actually has nothing to do with a trilogy, and that's halfway done already, and that's on Yeshua and his teachings.
Oh, very good.
Yeah, so it'll be, and we're going to be bringing in all of his teachings, right? And so that includes some of the teachings that he learned when he traveled. So all of that's going to actually be brought into book 2.
So more than a gospel, more than a gospel.
Yes, exactly. I feel there's 10 books coming, or 10 books total, 10 or 11. I don't know. I keep getting that, but we'll see.
It sounds amazing. And I look forward to reading about Yeshua and the next book you write. I want to thank you for spending this last half hour with us. And I want to tell our audience to join us again next time for another episode of Online for Authors. And until then, I'm Carol O'Neill. Happy reading.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.